You think you know what your ancestors looked like: a hunched figure, a club, a grunt instead of a sentence, slowly standing up straighter over thousands of years until it becomes you. That image is wrong. It's not just simplified, it's backwards. For most of the last few million years, you were not alone on this planet. Multiple human species lived at the same time, in the same world, sometimes in the same valleys. Some were shorter than your shoulder. Some had brains a third the size of yours. One of them you only know existed because of a single finger bone. This isn't a straight line. It's a tangled, branching family tree, and most of the family is gone. So who were they, and what happened to them? Let's start at the root. Around 6.5 million years ago, there was a single population of primates, not quite human, not quite chimpanzee, something in between, and we don't even have a full fossil of it yet. From that population, 2 lineages split apart. One eventually became the chimpanzees and bonobos alive today. The other became us. Neither one came from the other. You didn't descend from a chimpanzee. You share a great-great-grandmother with one. From there, that lineage didn't walk in a straight line toward you. It branched. It experimented. Most of those experiments ended in extinction. One of the earliest experiments has a name you already know: Lucy. Lucy belonged to a species called Australopithecus afarensis, and her bones are about 3.2 million years old. She became famous because nearly 40% of her skeleton survived, which is extraordinary for something this old. People called her the missing link. That title is wrong. Lucy isn't a link connecting ape to human in a chain. She's proof of something specific, that walking upright came long before a bigger brain did. Bipedalism first, intelligence later. Your body learned to stand before your mind learned to plan. Now picture her walking across an open landscape on 2 legs, like you, but with a brain barely a third the size of yours. Capable of walking for miles, not yet capable of imagining tomorrow. Move forward, around 2.4 million years ago, a new species shows up: Homo habilis, the handyman. This name comes from one thing: stone tools were found right next to their bones. For a long time, paleoanthropologists believed habilis invented technology itself. Simple sharpened stones used for cutting and scraping. Their brains averaged around 610 cubic centimeters. Yours averages around 1,350. They stood roughly 3 to 5 feet tall. No evidence of fire yet. Mostly plants, occasionally meat. But here's the twist that broke the story. In 2011, researchers found stone tools at a site called Lomekwi 3, near Lake Turkana in Kenya. Those tools date back 3.3 million years. That's 700,000 years before Homo habilis even existed. Neither Lucy's species nor any known hominid from that period was thought to be smart enough to make tools on purpose. So who made them? We don't know. We don't know what that toolmaker became, or whether it became anything at all. Somewhere in that lost stretch of time, someone was deliberately shaping rock with intention, and we have no name for them. Next came a species that, frankly, deserves more credit than it gets: Homo erectus. Homo erectus survived from roughly 2 million years ago to just 117,000 years ago. Pause on that. You, Homo sapiens, have only existed for about 300,000 years total. Erectus outlasted your entire species' timeline more than 6 times over. They were the first hominins to leave Africa. Their remains have been found across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Heights varied by region, from about 5 feet to 6 feet tall. One of the most complete skeletons ever found, known as Turkana Boy, stood roughly 5 feet 3 at the time of his death. Erectus moved beyond simple stone tools into something more refined: symmetrical hand axes and cleavers, crafted with real attention to detail. Their bodies were also changing: shorter arms, longer legs, more like yours. And then there's the discovery that changes how you should think about them entirely. Researchers found an elderly Homo erectus individual with every single tooth socket completely healed over. He had lost his teeth long before he died, which means for years he could not chew solid food on his own. Someone fed him, Someone softened his food, kept him alive, kept him part of the group long after he stopped being useful in any practical sense. That's not survival of the fittest. That's compassion, written into the bones nearly 2 million years before anyone wrote a single word. Erectus also gives us one of the earliest confirmed uses of controlled fire. At a South African site called Wonderwork Cave, dated to around 1 million years ago, someone kept that fire alive. We don't know how they started it. We just know they didn't let it go out. Now things get strange. In 2013, a caver named Steve Tucker was squeezing through an 18-centimeter gap deep inside a cave system in South Africa, a space barely wider than his shoulders. He came out the other side into a dark chamber. His headlamp landed on a bone, then more bones, then half a skull. What he'd found became the largest single collection of hominin fossils ever recovered in Africa, over 1,550 specimens from at least 15 individuals, all pulled from a chamber nearly 100 yards inside the cave, a space so difficult to reach that fewer than 50 people have ever been documented entering it. This species became known as Homo naledi. Their brains were small, somewhere between 465 and 620 cubic centimeters, barely bigger than a chimpanzee's. Their shoulders were ape-like, built for climbing, but their hands and feet were strikingly human. Curved fingers for gripping branches, wrists fine enough for precise tool use. And here's where it gets genuinely unsettling for paleoanthropology. Some researchers believe naledi may have deliberately placed their dead deep inside that cave system. If true, that means a creature with a brain the size of a grapefruit may have been engaging in something resembling ritual hundreds of thousands of years before we assumed any non-sapien species was capable of it. We're still not sure exactly when naledi lived. Estimates range from 2 million years ago to as recently as 240,000 years ago, which would place them alive at the very same time as Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens. Meanwhile, far away on an island in Indonesia, evolution was running a completely different experiment. In 2003, researchers discovered the remains of a hominin standing just 3 to 3.5 feet tall. They nicknamed the species the Hobbit. Its formal name is Homo floresiensis. Its brain measured between 380 and 420 cubic centimeters, roughly the size of a chimpanzee's, and comparable to Lucy's species from 3 million years earlier. Every other hominin alive at that time had a brain 2 to 3 times larger. And this wasn't 3 million years ago. This was around 50,000 years ago. So why so small? The island of Flores has never been connected to mainland Indonesia by a land bridge. Floresiensis likely descended from Homo erectus populations that arrived by raft or drifting debris, then became trapped. And isolated populations on islands tend to undergo something biologists call insular dwarfism. Large animals need large amounts of food. On a small island with limited resources, smaller individuals survive longer, eat less, and reproduce more successfully. Generation after generation, the population shrinks. This wasn't unique to them. A pygmy elephant species on the same island shrank down to roughly 4 feet tall. Floresiensis hunted Komodo dragons, giant rats, and that pygmy elephant, alongside local fruit, roots, and tubers. Local Flores mythology still tells stories of a small, hairy, language-murmuring creature that steals food and children from villages. They call her Ibu Gogo, the grandmother who eats anything. Make of that what you will. Now for the strangest fossil on this entire list. In a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, researchers found a bone fragment small enough to hold between 2 fingers. It belonged to a 13-year-old girl. Researchers call her Denny. Denny is the only confirmed first-generation hybrid of 2 distinct human species ever discovered. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan, a species we know almost entirely through fragments like this one. A few teeth, a pinky bone, a partial jaw. Here's how we know any of this. Researchers measured the density of her bone's outer layer to estimate her age. Thin enough to rule out an adult, thick enough to rule out a young child. To confirm the fragment was even hominin in the first place, they used a technique called zoo-MS, essentially reading the protein barcode still preserved in 90,000-year-old bone. Then came the DNA. Mitochondrial DNA, passed down only from the mother, came back Neanderthal. Nuclear DNA, inherited from both parents, came back roughly half Neanderthal and half Denisovan. One bone, two species, one impossible 90,000-year-old confirmation that they didn't just coexist, they had children together. Which brings us to the species you probably think of first when someone says caveman, Neanderthals. Named after the German valley where they were discovered, Neanderthals split from your lineage somewhere between 550,000 and 765,000 years ago, making them one of your closest relatives on this entire tree. The brutish, club-dragging image comes from one specific mistake. In 1908, a French paleontologist reconstructed a Neanderthal skeleton and deliberately posed it as hunched and ape-like. He knew the specimen belonged to an elderly individual with severe arthritis. He reconstructed it that way anyway. That single reconstruction shaped over a century of pop culture. The reality looked nothing like that. Neanderthals built composite tools, combining stone, bone, and wood into single functional objects. They controlled fire for cooking and for processing plants. They made jewelry. They created cave art that predates anything made by Homo sapiens. A 2021 study found their inner ear anatomy was tuned to the same frequency range as human speech. In Iraq, researchers found a Neanderthal skeleton showing a withered arm, blindness in one eye, and a healed leg fracture, injuries severe enough that he could not have survived alone. His group kept him alive for years, and they had medicine. Researchers found traces of penicillin mold in Neanderthal teeth at a cave site in Spain, along with evidence they chewed poplar bark, which contains salicylic acid, the same compound at the core of modern aspirin, for somewhere between 2,600 and 5,400 years. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens shared this planet, and shared more than just territory. Anyone of non-African descent today carries roughly 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. Some of those genes still help you: immune function, cold weather adaptation. Some of them are linked to increased risk of depression and blood clotting disorders. Neanderthals are extinct, but you are, quite literally, partly made of them. Why did they disappear around 40,000 years ago? The honest answer is we don't fully know. Competition with Homo sapiens, climate change, or some combination of both. The uncomfortable likelihood is that we outcompeted them and absorbed them into our own gene pool at the same time, which leaves us with you, Homo sapiens, the only member of this entire family still standing. The oldest known Homo sapiens fossil, found at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, is roughly 300,000 years old. For a while, scientists actually mistook it for a Neanderthal. Our early skulls were more elongated than yours, with smaller brain cases overall, but with proportionally larger frontal lobes, the part of the brain responsible for planning, reasoning, and imagining a future that hasn't happened yet. You also have a chin. You're the only hominin on this entire list that does. Nobody is fully certain why. Your big brain came at a brutal cost. Human babies are born with brains at only about 28% of their adult size, dramatically underdeveloped compared to a chimpanzee newborn, which arrives at around 45%. That's not a coincidence. A bigger skull combined with an upright pelvis makes human childbirth one of the most dangerous in the entire animal kingdom. Evolution's workaround was to kick you out early, half-finished, and let your brain keep building itself in the outside world. That brain is expensive to run too. It consumes 20 to 25% of your resting energy, roughly twice the metabolic cost of a chimpanzee brain doing the same job. Chess grandmaster Anatoly Karpov reportedly lost 22 pounds during a 5-month 48-game world championship match in 1984. Whether that was the cognitive load itself or the stress around it is still debated, but the point stands. Thinking this hard isn't free. Around 70,000 years ago, your species began migrating out of Africa into the Middle East, Asia, Europe, eventually Australia and the Americas. And here's the uncomfortable pattern historians and paleontologists keep finding. Everywhere Homo sapiens arrived, the local megafauna and the local hominin species started disappearing shortly after. Neanderthals vanished within a few thousand years of your arrival in Europe. Floresiensis disappeared not long after you reached Southeast Asia. That doesn't necessarily mean you hunted everyone to extinction, but your rise was so fast that the rest of the world simply didn't get the hundreds of thousands of years it usually takes other species to adapt to a brand new predator. So look at the full tree. Lucy's species walking upright with a tiny brain, Habilis shaping stone, the mystery toolmaker before either of them, Erectus outliving everyone, caring for its elderly, keeping fire alive for 1,000,000 years, Naledi possibly burying its dead in the deepest part of a cave most humans will never reach, Floresiensis shrinking down to survive on an island, Denny proof that two separate species fell in love, or at least reproduced, in an ice age cave in Siberia, Neanderthals with their medicine and their music-tuned ears and their dead carried into the ground with offerings, all of them gone. You are the only branch left standing on a tree that used to be full. You still carry pieces of them in your DNA, in your instincts, in the shape of your skull. You still gather, you still forage, you still solve problems with whatever objects happen to be lying around. You still rely on tight social bonds to survive things you couldn't survive alone. Paleoanthropology is still moving fast. New species are still being proposed. Caves are still being excavated. There are almost certainly chapters of this story that haven't been found yet. You think you know what your ancestors looked like. You don't, not really, not yet. But now you know something better than the old picture in your head. The truth was never a straight line. It was a crowded room, and you're the last one standing in it,